Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 horrifying facts that you didn't know about knights. Number 10. They barely ever had to work.
For the most part, knights in feudal Europe were expected to swear their loyalty and their sword to a lord or king and become their vassal. In return, the lord or king would give the knight several hundred acres of land to call his own. This allowed a knight the opportunity to make himself extremely wealthy if he so desired. So you're probably thinking that in return for several hundred acres of land, a giant house, and slaves to do all the dirty work, knights would be expected to work pretty hard, right? Well, as it turns out, knights were expected to do no more than 40 days of work per year. This work could consist of stuff as simple as escorting the lord and his rapidly swelling backside to and from a hunt. Of course, it could also include going to war, but...
Number 9. During battle, they were highly unlikely to be killed.
During the heyday of knights, warfare was a much different beast than it is now. The role of knights in battle was vastly different than what you'd probably expect. Their real value came in the fact that they rode horses. That's something common foot soldiers were forbidden from doing, even though the horses were the real MVPs of feudal battlefields. The perceived value of knights was such that in battle, conscripted peasants and common foot soldiers could sometimes face severe repercussions for killing one, even if the knight was fighting for the other side. This is because captured knights could often be ransomed back to their lords. This same courtesy was not granted to the common soldiers mentioned above. Many of those grunts would be slaughtered instantly if they were captured.
Number 8. Chivalry only applied when they wanted it to.
Chivalry, along with being a thing that guys in fedoras online complain about being dead, was a basic code of conduct knights were expected to live by. It espoused the tenets of basic respect and honor. Though the chivalric code is a thing that existed, few knights actually followed it. The reason we think they did has largely been attributed to medieval romantic literature, which often portrayed knights as unwavering sentinels of justice. In reality, knights did whatever they wanted because they could, and they only showed respect to those of a higher station. During war, knights frequently looted, pillaged, and raped. They would raid villages for supplies, indiscriminately killing serfs, farm animals, because screw them, we guess. This practice was so widespread that many knights considered looting to be their right. Accepting the booty, both metaphorical and literal, they took for themselves was something they thought they were owed for their service.
Number 7. Only rich kids could become knights.
The route to becoming a knight was rigid. It essentially limited knighthood to kids who today would have names like Quentin or Chet. While poor or common folk could become knights if they did something exceptionally badass during battle or saved a lord's life, they were equally likely to be killed for embarrassing someone who had the foresight to be born with money, meaning virtually all knights were nobles of some kind. This kind of makes the fact knights could punch poor people in the head or take their stuff all the more jarring. By virtue of their birth, knights were almost always independently wealthy.
Number 6. Gathering in big groups, picking fights, and harassing women.
As noted above, knights generally only followed the parts of the chivalric code they wanted. One part of that code states that a knight must always be ready to defend his honor if it's challenged. To take advantage of this, it was commonplace in the 14th and 15th centuries for large groups of knights to gather at well-traveled areas like bridges and rivers. There, they would pick fights with other passing knights trying to go about their business. As you can imagine, peasants would often avoid these areas like the plague. The risk of being attacked by a bored knight was extremely high. Likewise, any man attempting to pass with his wife would be expected to fight for her honor. Nothing says chivalry like harassing a guy's wife until he gets angry enough to punch you. If a woman had the audacity to attempt to pass by without a man, the knights would accost her until she handed over a piece of clothing. She'd then have to ask a knight to go get it back.
Number 5. Jousting was pay to win.
Few aspects of being a knight have been romanticized as much as the idea of jousting. You know, the sport involving two men in plate armor attempting to poke each other in the face with sticks from horseback. Initially, it served as a way for two knights to test their skills against one another. Jousting armor, as it was known, often weighed in excess of 100 pounds. It was so heavy that the wearer could barely move. He was usually only being held in jousting position by the armor itself. While skill undeniably played a role in determining the winner of a joust, rich enough knights could simply buy armor so ridiculously heavy that it was nearly impossible to unhorse him. That made winning vastly easier. Poorer knights, meanwhile, had to make do with the same armor they used for battle, which was designed for battle as opposed to dominating face-poking tournaments.
Number 4. Women couldn't become knights, but were expected to do the job of their dead husbands.
Like so many of the coolest jobs in history, being a knight was exclusively reserved for the owners of a penis. Their wives were expected to sit at home, not learning to kill people with a broadsword, their bloodlust going offensively unsated. Unless their husband died like a moron, that is. In that case, women were expected to fulfill all of their husband's knightly duties. This included protecting their lord and making sure his land didn't fall into disrepair. Only women didn't get any of the cool stuff that came with it, like respect or acknowledgement by history. The duties generally expected of a knight's wife included everything from organizing the defenses of their estate to arranging marriages for their servants. This was on top of being at the beck and call of her husband 24 hours a day.
Number 3. Knights could nearly be killed trying to woo a woman.
Women, as throughout most of recorded history, got a rough deal in the era of knights and chivalry. However, ladies of high enough standing did have some say when it came to being wooed, and boy did they take advantage of that. The most notable example of this is likely Ulrich von Liechtenstein. Yes, the character from A Knight's Tale was based on a real guy. He tried to woo a noblewoman in the 13th century and nearly died in the process. The lady being wooed took particular exception to being courted by Liechtenstein, both due to his appearance, he had a hair lip, and the fact that he already had a wife. So, like her movie counterpart, she made Ulrich do a whole host of activities to prove his love. Totally innocent and sane things, like cutting off his finger, competing in jousts, wearing a dress instead of armor, and sleeping amongst a group of leprosy-infected peasants.
Number 2. Knights treated serfs just terribly.
In feudal Europe, serfs were considered to be the lowest dregs of society. They were even lower than farm animals because at least you could eat those. Though serfs were technically protected by the lords of the land they worked, lords and knights could freely beat them or demand their property. Serfs had to pay for anything they took from the land since it belonged to their lord. Taking it without permission or due payment was a crime that often resulted in a severe beating. Serfs couldn't marry or even travel without a lord or knight's permission, meaning many serfs died without ever having travelled more than 5 miles from the place they were born. Since they were integral to the upkeep of a lord's land, serfs were often the first target for knights. Some knights would intentionally not kill serfs, but instead severely wound them by hacking off a limb. That way, there'd be a drain on the landowner's resources.
Number 1. Becoming a knight used to mean being slapped across the face.
As seen in movies, the process of knighting a person today usually involves lightly tapping the person being knighted on the shoulder with a sword. The exact origins of this tradition are unclear, but it's believed to originate from the idea that a young squire wasn't ready to be a knight until it had a weapon buckled against his armor during battle. A squire couldn't readily rely on this happening, so a symbolic gesture was created, one that involved hitting the squire across the face and then on the shoulder with a sword. How hard the squire was hit generally depended on how big a jerk the person knighting him was. You can probably imagine that many squires started their first day as a knight with a handprint on their face. Though it was customary to only lightly hit the squire, since it was the only hit in his entire life the squire was required not to return, some knights took advantage of the opportunity to be a tool without consequence. They'd give the squire a punishing, jawbone-shattering backhand to the face for absolutely no reason. Something we, for some mysterious reasons, feel absolutely fine about.
So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do give us a like below and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Also, if you like this video, over there on the right are a couple of other videos that you might enjoy as well, so be sure to check those out. Be sure to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.